Welcome to the Change Collective podcast, where we celebrate incredible stories of social leaders who made a real impact in their communities and the world beyond. Today, we are super excited to have Viswanaathan Radhakrishnan, Head of Social Initiatives at Landmark Group. Vishwa's professional and personal journey has been immensely inspirational and truly out of the ordinary. An engineer by profession and a social leader by choice. We are absolutely honored to have you on our podcast, Vishwa. Welcome.
Hi, Pratyush. Thank you very much. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Vishwa. We are happy to have you as well. And again, just to give you an introduction of Viswanath, he has more than a decade's worth of experience under his belt, and he's had an eventful professional journey. And Vishwa, you've done some groundbreaking work at Cognizant, where you mobilized more than 100,000 volunteers in the company's initiatives. You also spearheaded inclusion in tech, which promoted STEM education and tech education amongst the marginalized. And now at Landmark, as the head of social initiatives, you're working towards better health, well-being, skilling, and environment. And of course, I could go on and on and on. But before we dive into all of that, we would love to hear your story, the story of how an engineer turned into a volunteer leader.
Sure. As you kind of gave the right context, I'm an engineer by profession. And after engineering, I joined Cognizant as a software engineer. So what happened was, in Cognizant, there was this opportunity to volunteer. The Cognizant had its corporate employee volunteering program, but over and above that, Cognizant was also promoting certain NGOs that were founded by some of the current or ex-employees of Cognizant. And through one such opportunities, I started volunteering in a government school. This was in 2009, about 14 years back. And the objective of that particular program was to go to a 10th class and teach them their syllabus, or help these children improve the pass percentage of 10th class. That's the goal that we started with. When I entered a class, interacted with the children, end of the session left me with a sense of, I would say, shock. I realized that there were at least one-third or more than one-third of the class in class 10, they were not able to do like a two-digit multiplication or division. And we're talking about them acing a trigonometry or a algebra, right? So that's when we decided as a team, that was for me like a inflection point. That was one of the very first volunteering programs that I participated. And I felt maybe people like me, though we are not professional teachers, we are not qualified, but we could contribute in improving this situation better wherever it is closer to us. And I started engaging more closer with this NGO. I started not only teaching, but also leading these teaching programs with this particular organization called Team Everest, and eventually became a core team member. And then from 10th, we shifted to going to at least 6, 7, 8 and trying to fix this problem, which I think back in 2009, it was not. Today, we have the ASER reports and other things. Even government surveys highlight this foundation literacy numeracy issues. But 14 years back, that's probably the time when the first ASER report was published. And it was not having the kind of visibility it had now. But going through the report, gave deeper insight that this is not isolated to this particular school or a particular region, but it is a common issue, whether it's an urban or rural. And I started volunteering more closely with this NGO, and I also started volunteering more on educational initiatives as part of the corporate employee volunteering program at Cognizant. So I think 2-3 years down the line, I was recognized among the outstanding volunteers in the organization during an annual conclave. And after that, I was invited for an opportunity to join the team full-time. I didn't think too much then. In fact, sometimes people ask this, okay, you do it as a passion, now taking it as a profession is a different thing, right? I didn't think too much. I said, okay, not many people have the opportunity I have. I was born in a lower middle class family, but luckily by the time I was into job, I didn't have any financial liabilities or taking care of other things, which would prevent me from taking up this role, even if it is financially less rewarding than a tech career, right? I felt I had this unique opportunity. Not many people who are as passionate as me, but not everybody will have this opportunity. So to be very honest, I felt it's my responsibility to take it up, not that I'm doing a service or whatever. And that's how I took up the opportunity. And I think then I worked with Cognizant, the employee volunteering, which eventually transformed into the social impact team, which then merged as part of the ESG team of Cognizant. And this 10-year journey has been very eventful, interesting, and it was a great learning opportunity. And then last couple of years, I'm leading CSR for Landmark Group in India. So that is like probably how it all started, and then that was like the spark and how that took me to where I'm here.
Thanks, Visha. I think that's really great to hear. And I think even at UNI, one of the early learnings was our volunteers very quickly realized what's the huge gap in basic numeracy and basic literacy. And it's amazing to see your evolution and your journey in the social space as a teacher, volunteer leader, and again to where you are today. And I know you put it very lightly by saying eventful and interesting, but we believe it's nothing but extraordinary, right? You've managed to do something that's really unheard of. 1 lakh volunteers mobilized in education skilling, environment, and community development. And all of this, I'm sure, with the same smile that you had on your face and the same determination that you had when you began this whole journey, right? And we just want to understand how you made this happen. Can you give us a bit more insight into this journey?
Sure. I think, see, first of all, disclaimer is it is not right to say that I have enabled 1 lakh people to volunteer, but the teams that I have led or the programs that I have designed through this, we had the opportunity to make close to about 75,000 to 100,000 people to volunteer over, let's say, 10-year period. And it has been a team effort, but it's not the entire of Cognizant, right? Cognizant did more than 1 million volunteers. And in that, one of the key contributions, like one pie, was part of the teams that I led and the programs that I designed. That is a disclaimer. But having said that, if I were to look back at how this was made possible in an organization, right? If you look at how it is made possible in a corporate environment, there were few very foundational things. See, the core belief was our aim in enabling employee volunteering. In fact, this inspiration for this whole thing in Cognizant came from employees themselves of setting up this platform. Just a bit of a background. I was not in Cognizant back then, but 2006 Cognizant became $1 billion organization, and then everybody got an iPod to celebrate it. But when Cognizant became a $2 billion organization, now I think iPhone was just launched, so people were really looking forward. But at a leadership level, something else was also happening in the organization. Internal blogging was becoming very popular, and a lot of people were sharing stories of their impact, how they were going into the community as individuals or smaller groups and creating an impact. That blogging gave that visibility. So at a leadership level, executive leadership felt we should create a platform to empower such people with administrative backing of Cognizant and facilitating it. So when it was founded, it was definitely, I don't think nobody would have thought that 1 million people would volunteer over 15 years back then. But it was founded with the core belief that we should empower our employees to give back in ways that they are passionate about. So I would say leadership commitment is very crucial in any organization, but it's just the beginning, right? I'm not saying just with leadership commitment, we can do everything. The second point I would say is that in the entire journey, if you see how volunteering evolved, and not just with Cognizant, but the other volunteering programs or organizations where I've been playing an active role, is that the common philosophy is that we go with the belief that everybody wants to give back. So maybe any organization will say 10%, 20% people will volunteer or 30%. Some number will change from organization to organization. But the core belief is everybody has the intention to give back. And today, after having met thousands of volunteers in person and in groups, I can say with conviction that everybody I've met in this journey had the intention to give back. So it was never about intention. But the journey there was primarily about how do we remove the roadblocks in front of them to realize that intention. That roadblock could be in terms of not finding the right time, not finding the right opportunity that excites them, or not finding it at a place that is convenient to them. So the whole objective of the entire volunteering core team was to remove the roadblocks that prevent somebody from giving back. In terms of giving back their time, skills, or their contribution. So that was the second important thing. You go with the belief that everybody wants to give back and look at removing the roadblocks, the strategy, the program, the behavioral change, all that we drove was with this core belief. Today, maybe 5% will be volunteering, right? Doesn't mean remaining 95% are not interested. And that's how 5% became 10, 20, 25, and so on. And we are talking about organization. Cognizant is close to 400,000 people. But I think when I was there, it was still about 60 to 80,000 people when I started. So it's fairly big. And that scale, 25%, 20% is a huge number. And globally, we are talking. So that was the second core belief. And third is how do we do it in a systematic manner? So the volunteering program, when it started growing organically, we set up something which we call the volunteering councils in every department, every business unit of the organization. So your structure of your volunteering organization is closely aligning with the structure of your organization. And we also identify passionate people in this organization who are keen to drive it. And passionate people need not be the topmost leader in the hierarchy. So that was a unique thing where probably an entry-level person will be leading a program where a senior director will be a participant, right? A very unique combination which will never ever happen in the organization in other instances. And that excited people, in fact. So you remove roadblocks in all possible ways, and then you create a structure which promotes volunteering, which gives people, and then it also decentralized, right? How much ever team you have, I mean, 5 or 10 or even 20, 30 people, if you have, again, 30 people cannot drive 100,000 organization. You still need leaders among the volunteers himself, the champions who take it up voluntarily, like precisely like how I took up that role when I was working full-time in the business. So we need hundreds and hundreds of such people. We have to identify them, give them the right opportunity that excites them, and provide them the resources to build their team and create impact. And so this was the third important thing, how we looked at structure. And the fourth is about tools that are important to drive behavior change. So because in a 15-year journey, you see every year there was evolution in the program. We start with going to a school and doing some donation where the value add of the volunteer is minimal. Then it transformed to probably going and teaching something. And then it went on to solving problems like improving literacy and numeracy. So you can go and teach. If you do a teach and teacher model, may or may not need content structure. The volunteer might share, but if you want to address a problem like fix a problem, it could even be a micro goal, right? Like helping a child who's not able to do addition or do subtraction, right? It could be a micro goal, but still to do it in a meaningful manner, a well-designed program is important. So those are the things which the core team focused on. That's why when I say, sometimes when the bottleneck was not having the right design in place or right content and right incentive, encouragement or resources for volunteers to deliver impact, then the team pitched in. So that was the fourth thing. So this is an evolving journey, right? While we can recognize the limitations of volunteering, there are also immense possibilities in volunteering. When you have the right design in place, when you understand your volunteer well, we understand your end target audience well, and design a program which plays to the availability, convenience, and strengths of the volunteer versus the target audience. So these are, I would say, few key points. And of course, last but not least, technology, right? How do we use tech tools to enable volunteer management at scale? That was one of the things, I think when the organization had about 2,000, 3,000 volunteers, that was the time when we realized that we need tech tools. We can't do it with forms and Excels. So in-house volunteer management tool was built and it was evolved. So I was involved in kind of evolving this tool and so on. In terms of keeping it like an enterprise product or like a startup, how a startup would look at target audience. So we kept it very lean and we evolved based on, for example, like we looked at IRCTC and kept the waitlist option when somebody is signing for a very popular event. So we know that even if we can't engage them now, we know they are passionate about this and we can create more demand for such events, right? That's a simple example. So like that, technology, of course, was an important enabler in going beyond the threshold scale. 5,000 to 50,000 technology was important. And when you go global, technology was important. So I would say these are like 4 or 5 things which are very important for any organization. Of course, they have to apply it to their culture, the way they work, the nature of their workforce and so on. But these things might remain, some of these are ideas, some of these are beliefs. So I would say these are fundamental to any organization to operate volunteering at scale and also create impactful outputs or outcomes out of it.
Nice. I think one thing that really stuck with me was when you said, go with the belief that everyone wants to give back. I think that's such a great core belief to have. And it's always easier to work towards removing those obstacles rather than trying to push people into doing something. So that's really great. And it's also the timing of how and when you started leveraging tech iPads or iPhones, blogging as well. I think that's also very incredible to hear.
Right.
And I think in terms of behavioral change, so one thing that I've always wondered, and I'm sure a lot of people leading CSR programs of certain companies or of different companies are thinking about is these employees more often than not have demanding jobs. And again, trying to get them to push towards volunteering can be a very challenging or a tricky task, right? And we'd love to understand how you were able to push people into volunteering and kind of tell them that, hey, this is also equally important. Your work is also important, and the social work or the change that you can create is also equally important.
Yeah, I think that's an important question to understand. Now, to understand that, first anybody has to understand their own organization and what people do in their day job, what kind of jobs they do, and where they find time, what is the culture of the organization. These are some fundamental things if you're doing this in a corporate environment. Or for example, even if you're reaching out to individual volunteers, still you need to understand the volunteer's life to some extent. But having said that, that's basic. Now, I would say a couple of things in terms of how we look at it. The fundamental thing is to see what is in it for me. For anything, we need to understand that volunteering is change management. If I have to relate to a management concept, it is change management. Because when you apply a management concept to things like this, you try to move closer to a problem solving approach rather than saying that this is the reality, only 5 in 100 or 10 in 100 would do. But rather, why are the remaining 90 not doing this? Today, when you're reaching out to somebody who's volunteering for the first time, essentially what are they going through, right? If you want somebody to on a Saturday morning to come to a school and teach. Now, what would they otherwise do on a Saturday morning? They would sleep longer, or they would chill out, or they would do something else which they are convenient or which they like doing. Now, we want to replace that behavior with the behavior that you desire. So you are trying to bring a change into their routine. It could be one time or it could be regular. So if you have to do change management, you need to understand what motivates that person. We always talk about motivators, intrinsic and extrinsic. Extrinsic can be about carrots and sticks. You can reward them, or you can kind of build a positive peer pressure to say that, hey, everybody around you is doing, why are you not doing it, right? That is extrinsic. But intrinsically, what can be connected to something that really excites them, something that is closer to their heart, or something where they feel they can contribute in a meaningful manner. And then volunteering is also about meeting people, building meaningful relationships outside work. So it is all about what is in it for me. For some people, it might be fun. For some people, it might be meeting new people. For some people, it might be working with children or working with that particular target audience that excites them, right? For some people, it may be the cause. If you ask me, for example, if I look at myself as a volunteer, education is something which I'm very passionate about. If you ask me to teach something which I know or I can prepare and do, that might excite me, for example, as an individual, right? So like that, what is in it for me, we need to understand. And how can you have a variety of programs which have most of these elements? I'm not saying every program should have all of this. So I think depending on that, the people will get aligned. And then you have to, as I said, make it convenient for them. Make it convenient for them at a time and at a location. That is, so excitement alone is not enough. People might look at, okay, is it worth doing? Yeah, it might excite them, but can I do it? Then the reality strike. I've seen a lot of women volunteers who are very passionate, but after a maternity break, they would love to volunteer, just that how to practically operationalize it, they've always had a challenge. So now in these cases, whenever we are able to identify something virtual, like a virtual teaching opportunity, or if they can do something which is closer to their home or workplace, like within half an hour they can do this, I've seen a lot of those people come back and participate. So one aspect is about understanding the what's in it for me and breaking it into your program design. I feel that's important. The second point is to look at how we look at volunteers. Now, it is an extension of my first point. So within the Cognizant outreach team, we had this terminology called tourist travelers and guides in terms of how we look at volunteers. So tourists are those volunteers who come once or twice and they come here for an experience and to see what it is. They may or may not stuck to us. So if you have 100 people, 50, 60 people will be our tourists, or maybe even more, 70 people will be a tourists. They might not volunteer more than one or few times in a year. And because they come here for an experience, some would like it, some would not like it, or some would connect to it, or some would not. Then the second is what we call travelers, who like the experience, who would want to continue this experience. And these are people who would be your regular volunteers. And then you have your guides, are the ones who lead volunteering programs, who become your brand ambassadors or evangelists, who will give you the scale to do more such programs. They are excited not just because of the cost, but their commitment levels will be very high, right? And so on. And sometimes some of these guides may not be the best teachers, but they might be very good in managing, organizing, and all. They would like teaching, but they might not be your best teachers. Sometimes your best teachers some of your travelers would like to be travelers and not move to the other bucket. It's like how you say somebody likes tech, they want to become an architect and a CTO rather than a project manager and a business head. So if you look at volunteers from tourist travelers and guide, let's say the percentages might vary, but I'm just saying 70-70% will be your tourists. Then about 10-15% will be your travelers and 5-10% will be your guides. When you understand this and you try to strike a balance between them, recognize who they are, where they are, which part of the journey. And it's also important to recognize you need to have guides. Otherwise, you can't scale your program. It's important to recognize your travelers. But if you have only a regular volunteering program, which will not attract new volunteers who can come for an experience, then it is like a dam, right? The river is flowing. Let's say 1 lakh liters of water is flowing. The dam is taking about, let's say, 10,000, 20,000 liters. Some percentage of it, you are kind of using it for a particular purpose. The rest will flow out. So an inflow of tourists is crucial for you to sustain your travelers and guides. So once we understand this better, I think we might have a better chance of succeeding in running volunteering programs. I do not know if this is more of theory, more of concepts management, but that has been like a reflection of the entire journey, I would say.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I really hope a lot of CSR professionals from across the country are watching this right now. I love your use of analogies. The tourist traveler guide, I think, really hits it home, clearly puts that picture across. And also, you speak in the right language. I think for a lot of professionals who are just now getting into the CSR space, just now exploring volunteering, I think the way you put it, change management can be a great way for them to explore it and go further down the line. And I think this is something we've also learned over time while building volunteering journeys for our volunteers in the Teach program. Teach program, again, is a extensive volunteering effort wherein volunteers give nearly 2.5 hours of their time every week for the entire duration of 9 months. And again, even our program is designed in such a way that we want to give them that taste, build that community for them, and then we'd want to make them to come back, right? And that's the only way to kind of having them to stay back. Ajit and Satish often say this, people come for the cause, people start volunteering for a cause, but they stay back only for the community, for the people that are around them, and the community that they built for themselves and for the children that they work with, right? So I really, really love that. And I love how you took a problem-solving approach rather than a let's design something new, let's create something new. I really appreciate your inputs, Viswa.
In fact, a lot of employees have personally told me they stayed longer in the organization just because they had this employee volunteering. And there were people who left, who came back after 2 years and said, one of the reasons I chose to come back to the organization was because I had this opportunity, right? But when we looked at data in there, data also kind of pointed out that there is a trend of volunteers staying a little longer in the organization than the rest of the average organization. So I think in terms of engaging them, you are talking about how they stick to the community or the cause. I feel that culture, sometimes people also stick to an organization, not just the program, but also the organization sometimes, because this reflects the culture of the organization.
Nice. I think a lot of studies done abroad as well. I'm not aware of the extent of research done in India, but this is proven to be true, right? Like employees are more engaged, more productive, and more happier in general working at companies where there is a huge opportunity to volunteer. And I really hope a lot of companies realize this. And it's just for end of the day for an employee or anyone looking for a job at a company, I'd definitely love for the company that I would work for to be socially conscious, socially aware, and doing some good work in the community. And I think that really shows, that really helps in the continuity of the company in the same community. It sends that message out, hey, if you are someone who of course want to do the work that you are good at, you went to college for, but also you get a great opportunity to give back to the community as well. I think that's what we miss, a lot of us miss at our jobs that we do. And it's great for companies when they give that opportunity. Uh, Let the volunteers do what they have to, let the volunteers do what they can. So, yeah, that's really incredible. Vishwa, now coming to Landmark Groups, Landmark is doing some incredible CSR work, and they've done incredible work during the pandemic. And your initiatives in health and wellness, education, and a lot of these other areas are really incredible. We would love to hear what drives the Landmark Group towards these cause areas, and also about the work that you guys have been doing in the past few years.
Sure. I would focus more. Of course, Landmark has been doing what we call as CSR initiatives even before the law came into place, right? I was also fascinated by in terms of how the organization is committed to create an impact on a very voluntary basis, even before something like a law or something came into place. So historically, the culture of giving back as an organization and contributing positively to the community has always been there, and it reflected in different ways. Sometimes through the philanthropic initiatives, sometimes in terms of how we take care of the extended people in our ecosystem when there is a crisis and so on, which is not driven only by business interests. So that has always been there, but I will kind of stick to what we've been doing more recently. There are a couple of areas that we want to continue focusing on. One is health and well-being. The second is employability. And of course, health and well-being has been like a very long thread because it was very close to the heart of our founder. He was a diabetic, so he felt that it was very important from his own personal experience on how we could help people to overcome this kind of health condition. So what we do currently and what we've done in the past has been more in terms of how we help people in terms of recognizing non-communicable diseases. It could be diabetes, it could be anemia, blood pressure, cardiovascular diseases, so on and so forth, which is like a very silent thing which you don't see, like a cold cough or a fever, but something that suddenly hits you hard when it becomes like a critical situation. Till then, many times you don't realize it, many of these conditions. So how could you create awareness about this to people? How could you help them with the right lifestyle habits that they could practice for a healthy behavior, to be a little proactive? And for those who, I mean, primarily for people who can't afford it, right? Well, all of us need it. You and I also, I might afford it, but if I'm not taking it seriously, I would still need it. But our focus has been more on people in terms of who cannot afford it. So we focused on rural areas, especially in those villages which are in and around the places where we operate. And also we looked at factory workers. They might be earning people, so they are not covered largely in many of these programs that people do, because people think only those who cannot earn, we'll have to focus on them because they are much more vulnerable, right? So in our program, we look at both people who do not earn, but among this thing, we felt factory workers are a very important population and they have to be given more attention in terms of recognizing their ability. And the good thing is now if you are able to make the factory management understand this, then it can have like a long-term impact. And in our experience, we found many of these factory leaders were very open. The intent was there in them, like what I told about volunteering. When he had the right intent to kind of take care of their workers, but they didn't know how to do it, or they didn't know what is the right way to do it, right? Many were even willing to invest in the well-being of their employees. Sometimes it also makes business sense, right? If your employees are healthier, they might be more productive and all that. I'm not saying it has to be completely philanthropic. It can be a little strategic as well. But the end of it, employees as individuals should also be more aware and they should take care of it. And how do we reduce the economic vulnerability when these people have to get for a treatment or something? Sometimes that healthcare cost puts the family in a very bad situation. So how do we reduce the economic vulnerability of these families, right? And by mapping them to the right systems that provide them, could be in terms of insurance and other things, state-sponsored insurance, ESIC and so on, how they could avail those facilities. Some might have the facility, not availing it. Some might not have the facility. How do you map them to those facilities? So these are some of the things we look at. So our intent is not just to make people aware of their health condition, but also encourage them and equip them to take action on it over a period, and also look at what are the systems that support them and how do you strengthen those systems. So that is in terms of health. It all started with the passion of our founder, but over time we have evolved it and looked at, we are kind of looking at model on very specific target audience so that we are able to amplify this to more such similar people. That is in terms of health. And see, employability is more straightforward, I would say. See, as an industry, we see people, employability is a major issue across industry. Any industry person would agree on that. One side, there are a lot of youth who are coming out every month, every year. I think as per a statistic, every month, about 1 million youth enter our working age population in India every month. Okay. And on the other side, a lot of these people, but only 5% of them receive professional skills or vocational skills. Right? So there is a huge gap. One side there is industry demand. The other side there are youth who are looking for similar opportunities, but sometimes they do not have access to that opportunity, or they're not equipped enough to take up that opportunity. See, how do we bridge this? And there are different target segments, but the target segment we have chosen currently is to work with women and persons with disabilities to kind of enable or create more pathways for them to be part of the formal workforce. So that's a program we kind of work with our implementation partners to identify women and persons with disabilities who might be even 10th pass or 12th pass, but for whom a job or a livelihood is very important. And how do we bridge the skill gap and map them to job opportunities which can transform their quality of life over a period of time. So these are a couple of programs over and above the employee volunteering initiatives that we are driving as an organization. And these have been the thought process behind what we are driving.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that, Viswa. I think I personally always like to see when the journey of a leader kind of trickles down into the CSR mission and the vision, right? I think a lot of people go through certain issues, go through certain health conditions. Not all of them stand up and say, hey, I have the platform to raise more awareness to the issue, get more eyes onto this issue, and again, to do something that will alleviate a lot of these people's pains and everything else, right? I think that's something I can definitely say Landmark has been doing amazingly, assessing the needs of the community, identifying the vulnerable population. So it's really great to get some insights into how we are running this program as well. And also you spoke about the population that enters Indian workforce every year. And I've heard that the retail companies are one of the largest employers of people in the entire country. And of course, Landmark Group boasts a considerable retail staff strength. And as you briefly mentioned, mobilizing such a volunteer base or mobilizing such a workforce into volunteering can be a tough challenge, right? Although they want to, because of the nature of their work, can pose a huge challenge for them to volunteer. And you've had an extensive amount of experience in rallying volunteers. I'd love to hear how Landmark Group plans to address this challenge, how you envision volunteering being a crucial tool in overcoming some of the challenges that we're facing today.
Right. So when I joined Landmark Group, of course, I joined during the COVID waves. So then we had to kind of wait for some time even before exploring something like volunteering. That was there. But when I joined here, I looked at how retail industry operates. First, I came from tech to retail. So understanding retail industry itself was a new experience. And within that, where does most of your workforce lie, and what are their possibilities and what are their limitations, right? It was important to understand that. And when I did a research in terms of how retail companies are enabling volunteering, I was surprised to see, globally and more so in India, you can't compare it with BFSI or a tech. And it is also about, which is more of a corporate job, whereas here it's a very different kind of a job, and the kind of people we are looking at, it was very different. So I realized that as an industry, retail volunteering is not a very popular thing. That's something I realized. So then went on to understand, okay, who's here? In any of these modern retail organizations, you would see that 70 to 80% of your workforce will be people who are in your stores. And people who are attracted to store jobs are people who are like after their 10th or 12th grade, they have the need to get into a job for any reason, right? They have to need or aspiration or interest to get into a job for a livelihood. And they come with a certain set of skills to that, and they build their skills over time and by working in this kind of roles or organizations. And it's a 6-day job in any retail organization, more or less, if you see. And the difficult part is it's a standing job. So if you have to make somebody to volunteer on the 7th day after 6 days of job, it is not easy. That's something we need to recognize first. So while we've been fairly successful in enabling our corporate employees to volunteer, so last 1.5 years, we are trying to gradually build it over a period of time, because you have to understand that volunteering is not something which is very familiar or known to this system, right? So you are introducing a new concept. Like the change management is more at an organizational level, not just at an individual level here. So you recognize this, and the industry works like that. So in terms of engaging retail employees, what is very important is to see how do we make them engage in very micro, small ways, right? It need not be like 2 hours, 3 hours getting on the field to do it, but how can they deliver this? So some of the things that we've been doing, and it's still work in progress, we are doing different experimentation. As you rightly said, retail is one of the largest employees in the country. But if you go and ask students in a high school what kind of job you want to get into, not many will talk about retail, right? See, primarily because there is very limited awareness in terms of what are the job opportunities that exist in retail. So when I entered this industry, I was fascinated by the diversity of roles that exist, right, within retail. I mean, huge spectrum of opportunities exist. But what people generally see could be somebody who's a customer-facing employee at the store. And even with that role, there are certain perceptions in the people. So our volunteers, especially who've joined as a junior person from a very humble background, and then people have risen to like a business manager or a store manager or a senior leader in the organization, right? So now we are looking at asking these people going to high school students or colleges and sharing their experience. So that is one of the programs that we are currently kind of doing in terms of people who are risen in the ranks in retail. Their own life is a very inspiring story for people, for many of us. How can they share it? That's one. The second is in terms of the larger amount of the work. Look at micro volunteering opportunities. For example, something where a lot of people engage, right? So it is more of giving, I would say. We encourage them to bring used garments from their place and see if we can contribute, make it channelized to certain specific purposes, to people in need or to certain organizations who can make value out of this piece of garments. And that was fairly successful. Many people participated. So it was more of giving. Then the other is in terms of sharing your knowledge. And we are also trying out encouraging children to come and visit our place, like a retail industry walkthrough where people can talk about what they do, how they approach customers, how to communicate, all that. It's like an exposure visit for young students. Maybe many of the students would have never visited a mall to go to a retail store, right? Their parents would not have been able to take them to malls. But they are going to a very fascinating environment and trying to see somebody whom they can connect to and knowing their story. So these are few things which we are currently piloting, experimenting, and seeing how we can scale this up. So I would still say maybe a few years from now, I believe that we can kind of show this as a very interesting case study for other organizations to replicate. But we are now in the learning process, I would say.
It's great to hear the different elements that kind of go into play. I did not have this level of insight into retail space and how volunteering can be a challenge, but I still really commend your effort to get students or children to visit these places. And for us also, this is something we've always found important, right? Like children need role models. And more often than not, when your parents come from a certain background and where you don't have role models immediately in your surroundings, you can't look up to your dad, you can't look up to your mom or your brother or uncle, because they might be doing daily work of daily labor. And you might end up doing the same job because that's all that you've seen. But I think giving these opportunities to children to see and open up the world for them in terms of the different things that they can do is really interesting. And retail work in no way is a simple job, right? Like there's a lot of customer facing roles, people facing roles, and there is a huge amount of potential for growth there. So I really hope through your efforts, a lot of youngsters get inspired and find these instant role models, right? While they're visiting these centers, while they're visiting the retail stores. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's really great. Thanks, Viswa. Vishwa, moving on to the last question, I feel like when it comes to volunteering, you essentially have a front row seat to see and identify the amount of change it can bring about, right? Like the power of volunteering. You know the magic that a mass can create when they're committed to serving the community or serving the cause. And again, if you can inspire a lot of these tourists, in your own words, into becoming travelers or guides, what would your words be for this community that might be watching us today?
So you're asking, how do we make tourists to travelers, is it?
Yeah. Tourists or travelers.
Okay. Again, it boils down to how do we remove the hurdles? Right? Tourists come for an experience. So how do we build an experience into your program that is enriching for people and something that they can connect to, right? Because the programs that you design for tourists generally will have to be highly engaging for the person, right? Because they come for an experience. And you will have to sometimes bake some elements of fun, other things into it. That's what will attract people to volunteering. But sometimes when you get into programs that engage travelers, they might outwardly look a little serious. You go and teach a group of children for 10 weeks. So what is the fun in kind of teaching? Sometimes, at a very high level, there seems to be like I'm moving from very experience oriented to something only if I'm really passionate about it, I will get into doing this. So the essence of that, I would say, sometimes is also about how you design your program. A couple of points to it in terms of when we design our program. One aspect is to see how you can bake some elements of experience. Just don't assume that the individual is going to come because the cause excites them or the community excites them. Don't assume that. I mean, you can take it from business, how company retains a customer or how companies try to engage a customer, right? Retail has a lot of very interesting experiences, how to bring your customer back, right? So like that, you have to look at your volunteer like your customer. And now a traveler is you acquired a new customer, but how do you retain the customer? And I mean, in a tourist to a traveler, it's more of customer acquisition versus retaining a customer for a good cause. So when you look at it that way, then we can become a little creative in seeing how can some of these programs that engage travelers also be like an experience within the program without diluting the core cause of the program. But how do you bake elements of it? For example, once in a while, can you also take volunteers for a small group activity, group event or something? So do some team building event within these volunteers, because then if they are as a team they work, then that relationship also is something that will help them stick to it, right? So that is one aspect. The other is, even if you all do all this, some people might not be able to come regularly, right? That way, if you design a program in such a way that it's a little more process driven. So if 3 people, if you need somebody to do a program for 6 weeks, okay, ideal case is to have 1 person coming for 6 weeks, but you have 3 volunteers. But 3 volunteers come and they do it for 2 weeks each. But then if it's a little bit more process centric and there is some kind of continuity between volunteer A and volunteer B, then the chances of this volunteer coming again is more. And the last point I would say is, I've also seen a lot of people, you see, they are travelers in a very different way. They are not travelers in the same program, but they are travelers within your volunteering program. So they will come to they'll come to a teaching program once, then they'll come to a rural program, they'll go to an environment program. These are people who want different experiences. So sometimes you should not look at travelers within one particular program, but you have to look at it at an organization level or overall level. So they are also having that kind of travelers. So for them, variety is important. So essentially, if you have variety across programs, variety that appeals to different types of volunteers, and within the same program, if you're able to bake in elements that continue to engage the volunteer and give them an experience, and if you also make it a little bit more process oriented, so that there is continuity, even if you have multiple people coming in, these are some things which, I mean, because I can only say which I've done and which has worked. These are things that have worked in moving tourists to travelers.
Nice. That's great. Thanks, Vishwa. I think one last thing I'd like to ask you is, do you have any message for any of the people watching this today to inspire them?
Sure. The potential of volunteering is endless. If you take a slightly different example, you would see a lot of spiritual organizations are run fully by volunteers, right? There are like, I have sometimes visited some of these centers, and I was fascinated by how a group of 1,000-2,000 volunteers are running an entire, like say, like a 30-acre campus, which is being visited by tens of thousands of people. That's a very different level of volunteering, and the kind of commitment are what attracts people. But there is so much I feel we can learn in terms of, even if you do volunteering, which is not towards a spiritual cause, but can we take a lesson out of this? I'm only saying that the potential of volunteering is endless, and no impact is too small. In fact, once there was a program we did where we encouraged people to give a gift to children for New Year. And one of the volunteers gave a chessboard to a child. And 4 months, 5 months down the lane, when we did a chess competition, this child was the one who won the first prize.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We would never know. I mean, as Steve Jobs say, you have to connect the dots back. So when we give, no impact or no contribution is too small. I think I'm saying this with conviction. Every contribution matters, whether it is monetary, whether it is time. It definitely would have made an impact, which you may or may not see. And nothing is impossible in volunteering. I've had many experiences. We had to do certain programs, and then previous day night we run into a crisis, but the universe conspires. Sometimes something magical happens and you're able to sort it out and pull out the program, right? And of course, we get to meet a lot of great people out of it. So while no contribution is too small, I feel no challenge is too big to address, and no distance is too far. And each of you, a volunteer, is someone who is taking somebody else's cause as personal. You're taking somebody else's cause as your own, somebody else's need or as your own, and you're trying to address it. And volunteering is one of those things which can really change the world. If there are a few things that can really change the world, definitely volunteering will be among those things. And each one of you who's volunteering is definitely a hero in that aspect. So keep volunteering and keep making a difference. That's the message I would like to share with volunteers.
Thanks, Viswa. Thank you so much. I think we have a lot to take away home today. Potential of volunteering is endless and no impact is too small. Right? I think these two kind of summarize the power of volunteering. And yeah, a heartfelt thank you for gracing our podcast with your incredible story. And I really appreciate your openness in sharing your journey and your patience in explaining concepts. And I think you have a great skill in taking learning from one place and applying it to the other. So thank you for sharing all of this with us. And thanks to everyone tuning in. We'll see you again in the next episode of another Change Collective podcast with a different leader and more stories of change. Thank you again.